Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Personal Theology. Welcome to all those here in the room, in real life, as they say, and probably more of you are on Zoom. Certainly my friends who are either in church or in bed at this time of morning. If they're tuned in, they're on Zoom. I'm here today to talk to you because Reverend Sue Magidson, one of your community ministers, served as a guest speaker recently at my home congregation, the congregation down the hill, the Berkeley Fellowship of Unitarian Universalist. Sue's topic was centered in the storm. She spoke about how to stay out of storms, how to survive in them, and sometimes how to create them. This really resonated with me because I've been working to create a storm in Greensboro, North Carolina since the summer of 2020. A gentle storm, a nonviolent storm for sure, but a profound change in how a famous revolutionary battle from the city's early history is remembered by the community and depicted in its public art. Why would a woman who lives in, my first time dealing with PowerPoint, so please excuse the glitches. Why would a woman who lives in Berkeley want to create a storm in Greensboro? And what does this have to do with Black history, you may be asking yourself. My connection with Greensboro goes back to the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, a Revolutionary War battle that took place on March the 15th, 1781. I wasn't there, of course, but my ancestor, my great-great-great-grandfather, Major Joseph Winston, was present. He was commanding militia troops. The fierce battle ended in a technical defeat for the Americans, but the fighting so decimated the British forces that it helped to pave the way for their surrender at Yorktown 6 months later. Statues and monuments, 28 in all, stand at the National Military Park in Greensboro to honor Winston and other North Carolina military and political leaders who worked for American independence. 10 years ago, I made a personal heritage trip to see my ancestors' monument. After the Revolution, Joseph Winston went on to represent his state in various elected offices at the local and national level. He served as an early trustee of the University of North Carolina. So I felt proud to view his statue and to snap photos. But Winston was also an enslaver who held Black men, women, and children in lifelong bondage. Naturally, this harsh fact is not included in the inscription on his monument, but our family had always known about it in a footnotish sort of way. Like many white people, we had the privilege of highlighting the accomplishments of our ancestors and downplaying their deplorable behaviors. I gave no more thought to Winston's statue until spring 2020, when George Floyd was murdered by police officers in Minneapolis. And people around the world responded with well-deserved outrage and profound grief. A national reckoning with visible representations of white supremacy was long overdue. Historians, activists, and average people gathered to demand changes to the public art landscapes that honored enslavers and Confederate generals. Some of you may well have been involved in such activities of reckoning yourself. One of Thomas Jefferson's white descendants wrote a New York Times op-ed piece calling for the Jefferson Memorial, told you I'm learning PowerPoint, to be removed and replaced by a statue of Harriet Tubman. A memory of my ancestors' statue immediately flashed into my mind. Oh snap, I said, or slightly stronger words to that effect. I have one of those ancestral memorials too. Joseph Winston was an enslaver whose statue was created with public funds. It's been maintained for over 130 years on federal land at taxpayers' expense. This is so wrong, so inappropriate on every level. My previous mental footnote about Winston's role as a slaveholder became a glaring headline. I experienced a whole range of feelings from anger, embarrassment, shame, grief. My ancestor had profited from the unpaid labor of African men, women, and children. I was deeply disappointed with him. He was ostensibly a Christian, but had not lived up to his values. I was also disappointed with myself. I had considered myself a racial justice advocate, but I had not previously connected the major touchstones of Winston's life: military service in the Revolution, elected public servant and higher education advocate, and at the same time that he was doing all these things, he was an enslaver until his dying day in 1815. Longtime Unitarian Universalist that I am, I believe that this public commemoration of Winston was wrong, and I wanted to do something about it. But what? Briefly, I wondered whether my commitment to nonviolence extended to statues. Fortunately, words are my weapon of choice. So I wrote an op-ed piece for the Greensboro News and Record, "Should the monument to my ancestor come down?" The closing question hinted at my opinion. If local activists decide that its removal is their priority, will I join them? With these words, my article could have been interpreted as inciting people to commit a federal crime. I had signed on to the Take It Down school of thought, the favored choice among activists in the summer of 2020, about what to do with public monuments that uplift white supremacy. Readers wrote lively letters to the editor in response to my opinion piece. A few folks said, "Leave your ancestor alone." The wife of a cousin I'd never met somehow found me online and emailed, "Right on, sister." The Greensboro History Museum called to interview me for a podcast. I hadn't exactly created a storm yet, but I had at least stirred up a breeze. Our local exchange of views in Greensboro echoed the conversations that were sweeping the country. Questioning the meaning and purpose of monuments. Do they teach values? Do they teach history? Who gets to decide what appears in public art? And most important, what happens when a community's values change over time? In Greensboro, someone raised the factual question about the 27 other monuments and markers at the park. Is Winston the only enslaver honored there? Through research, I found other prominent slaveholders represented among the park's public art. For example, the 3 North Carolina signers of the Declaration of Independence. And the commander of the American forces at the battle was Major General Nathaniel Greene. He had grown up Quaker. After the Revolution, he became an enslaver, a betrayal of his heritage even more profound than becoming a military leader. He is Greensboro's namesake. So this city is very attuned to its history. Sorry, hang on a minute there. It's been the focus of national attention twice, the battle that I just referred to, and the sit-in movement to integrate lunch counters in 1960. Today, a heroic bronze monument in downtown Greensboro commemorates the leaders of that successful civil rights struggle. Both the Revolutionary battle and the sit-ins were historic campaigns for greater freedom, 179 years apart. But the community's public art at the National Military Park shows only the white side of the story. At this point, I was hardly aware that there even was a black side to the story of the American Revolution, in Greensboro or anywhere else. I grew up in Tennessee, where schools did not teach me that the revolution would not have been won without the participation of people of color. And in college, my history courses focus more on the ancient Greeks and Romans than on the 5,000 Black patriots in the military struggle for American independence. In short, the history of the American Revolution has been whitewashed. Greensboro is an arts and history-loving city, but I came to realize that to remove the representations of all the enslavers at the battle would not be politically feasible. Too many important people. So guidance on what I should do next would have to come from people outside the area. Folks like me who were questioning their own moral responsibilities as descendants of slaveholders. Where do you find such people? You can't just walk up to strangers in the supermarket to ask, was your ancestor an enslaver too? I imagine posting on social media, white person with slaveholder ancestry seeks same for strategic planning. A Google search provided just what I needed. It was Coming to the Table, a national organization which brings together descendants of enslavers and descendants of enslaved people for deep sharing, reconciliation, and work for racial justice. It works through local chapters to bring these two descendant groups together. The East Bay chapter is called Welcome to the Table. Through its monthly meetings, I met some fellow UUs. Along with other activists, we learned about the concept of accountability. Find the ways in which your ancestors benefited from slavery, then take your share of responsibility to correct the resulting inequities in today's world. So my beginning steps towards accountability entail simply telling the truth in a public format. For my next op-ed piece, I describe sending for a copy of Winston's will, and in his own handwriting, he named the 8 Negroes he was holding in slavery at the time he died. Their names are Chloe, Dr., William, Cato, Tom, Lydia, Violet, and her child. These stark words should be added to the explanatory material on Winston's monument I wrote. And this is the second stance towards politically offensive monuments that was emerging in 2020, what activists call retain but explain. To describe their full context doesn't demand the immediate removal of a monument, but creates a broader framework for understanding why it's offensive. In Winston's case, he benefited from the free labor of enslaved people and therefore could afford to spend time away from home on military campaigns. He earned a public acclaim as a military commander, which led to elective office. The city of Winston-Salem bears his name. So does a street in Greensboro. In that op-ed piece, I also noted that a monument to the British Crown forces, the Brits, the Hessians, the American Loyalists, had been erected at the park as recently as 2016. This was in addition to the 26 other monuments and markers there, which also honor white folks. So I entitled that opinion piece, "Statues So White." It did not get published. Like a tree that falls in the forest when no one is there to hear it, my truth-telling opinion piece landed and stayed in the newspaper editor's inbox. No one in Greensboro would be reading my ancestral accountability story. Not even a whiff of a breeze this time. So I decided to visit the city again to seek some personal inspiration about what to do next. And by a series of synchronicities, I met a local woman who is also a descendant of one of the soldiers of the battle, one of the Black soldiers. And he fought in a militia company right next to my ancestors' troops. Serena had lived near the park for 18 years, literally walking in the footsteps of her ancestor, Ishmael Titus, before becoming aware of her family's connection to the land. Meeting Serena inspired me to begin filling in my gaps in understanding the Black American revolutionary narrative. On the national level, I learned that Crispus Attucks, a man of mixed Black and Indigenous ancestry, was one of the first to die in the cause of American Revolution. That's about the extent of what most Americans are taught in school about Black participation in the Revolution. There was so much more for me to learn. African Americans and mixed-race soldiers constituted at least 6% of Patriot troops. Black soldiers fought in every battle and almost every skirmish in the Revolution. They enlisted for longer terms than white soldiers. And a greater number of African Americans understandably supported the British side because they promised freedom for enslaved people. In Greensboro, 46 Black soldiers fought in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. That's roughly 10% of the Patriot forces on the field that day. They are the hidden heroes of the military encounter, not yet visible in the park's monuments or the names on city streets. So forget about taking down the Winston statue. My goal became to get a new monument erected at the National Park, one to honor the battle's Black Patriots. That's position number 3 in activist thinking about offensive monuments. Deal with what's there if you can't get rid of it, but then organize to erect a new monument to represent the people who have been left out of the story. I began writing more op-ed pieces, this time emphasizing the value to the community of putting forth a new public art narrative about who fought in the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Greensboro has a population of 43% Black people, and the county itself has 33% Black residents. School children visit this site on educational field trips. They may be more receptive to learning the history when they see a statue which looks like them. Public art fosters community pride and a sense of belonging. It's difficult to realize our full humanity when society doesn't affirmatively mirror us back to ourselves. My opinion pieces were published under such titles as Minding Our Monuments, Honoring Hidden Heroes, They Were Good Soldiers. I was getting the hang of writing guest op-ed columns that told the truth, but not such large chunks of it at any given time as to be unpublishable. And I took copies to share when I visited the UU Church of Greensboro, which I had done several times. Gradually, the cultural institutions of Greensboro began to take notice of what I was writing. They reached out to my little one-person organization called Representation Matters. Surely they thought it was more than just one retired Berkeley woman with a letterhead and a recycled business card from a UU congregation in Berkeley. The Greensboro History Museum asked me to consult on a series of webinars called Minding Our Monuments. Serena and her cousins, Solomon and Deirdre, took part. At last, breezes of change were beginning to stir. Then the library, the History Museum, and the Military Park asked me to help plan a community forum on celebrating Black Patriots. Serena, pictured here, the local descendant of a Black Patriot, and Solomon, her cousin from Rochester, New York, told the story of their search for their family's revolutionary history. Ishmael Titus, told you I'm learning PowerPoint, served in the North Carolina militia as a substitute for his enslaver. He fought at Guilford Courthouse and 2 other battles. He survived brief capture by the British, and at some point he liberated himself, what used to be called running away, self-liberation, and enlisted again as a free man. After the Revolution, he applied for the pension, which was promised to all who had served in the American Revolution. He did not get it. He died at the age of 110 as a poor man, and his legacy is a very large tribe of descendants who still struggle to this day to reclaim all of their family history. At the forum that night, Serena also told the story of how she and I came to consider ourselves land sisters because we had ancestors in common. In 2022, we created a Memorial Day ritual at the park to bless the battle site. We intoned the name aloud of each Black patriot we had found to thank them for their service. We invoked the spirits of our ancestors, and we sang the UU hymn, "There is More Love Somewhere." And just as we were wrapping up, a small company of local musicians showed up to offer a rendition of taps. Now, this may be a bit woo-woo for some of you, but for Serena and me, this event felt like it was meant to be. To say that the Black Patriots commemorative program was well received would be quite an understatement. 82 people came to on a cold, rainy night, and 16 more joined by live stream. For the audience, it was a fulfillment of a wish that they hadn't realized they had, to hear heroic stories of African Americans who risked their lives for the Revolution. Listeners were meeting the flesh and blood descendants of Ishmael Titus, a Black patriot who had previously been erased from Greensboro's history. A palpable feeling of love and pride suffused the auditorium. So this community forum marked a turning point for Greensboro's relationship to its Black patriots. Local awareness grew by leaps and bounds. A popular journalist wrote a barn burner of an op-ed piece for the News and Records Memorial Day edition. Here's his first paragraph. On this Memorial Day, consider a revolutionary act. Here, finally honor the African American patriots who fought for American freedom right here at the pivotal battle of Guilford Courthouse. History can't wait. The time for a monument honoring Guilford Battleground's Black patriots is long overdue. So the Greensboro City Council heard this message and roundly seconded it. They passed a resolution calling for visual public commemoration of the Black patriots. Of course, a new monument can't go up overnight, but a new form of public art emerged. It's known as a bus route, and we see them all the time when they're advertising companies that provide products and services. But this was honoring a social justice message. It's a large decal covering one entire side of a bus. It named all the Black patriots identified so far and displayed visual images. Appropriately enough, the bus made its public debut on July the 4th. Thousands of people viewed the bus at the downtown holiday celebration. Many viewers ran their hands over the decal as if they were convincing themselves that this inclusive version of history was real. People took selfies with their children. And the most frequent comment was, "I didn't know. I never knew anything about the Black patriots. I'm so proud to learn these facts." Others said, "This is information I want my kids to know." So throughout the rest of 2023, the Black Patriots bus has continued to inspire the community. It fulfills public education roles on special occasions, as well as running regular routes throughout the city. The bus rolled along in the Veterans Day Parade, accompanied by an honor guard of 12 people, including the Park Service staff, and of course, Serena, the descendant of Ishmael Titus, and me, the descendant of Joseph Winston. The Black Patriots route turns the bus into a mini mobile history museum. So by the end of 2023, leading citizens of Greensboro were enthusiastically welcoming the Black Patriots out of the shadows of 242 years of history. Almost no one knew about them a year ago. So if art is a language, then public art is public speech. So nearing the end of the year, the storm I set out to create in Greensboro was brewing along nicely, but it had taken a new course. My plan to create a monument to commemorate Black Patriots was attracting support, but with an interesting twist. Instead of the National Military Park as the preferred site, local Black leaders chose a spot downtown, near the historic center of Greensboro's African American community. They see this long-needed addition to Greensboro's public art as the future gathering place for community commemorative events such as Juneteenth, Dr. King's Day. So this encouraging turn of events reminded me that public art should be a team sport. A good outcome depends on the interaction of all the players. So creating a storm and becoming accountable for the legacy of my enslaver ancestor has been a spiritual journey. It is based in Greensboro, geographically, and philosophically, it's based in my UU values, but it's by no means limited to that city. I'm continuing to spread the word about the important role played by African Americans in the Revolution. It is very moving to learn their situation at that time, the heartbreaking choice that they had to face in the colonial era, whether to fight for the freedom of this emerging nation, even while realizing that their own liberation was in no way guaranteed. So this is a call for all of us to learn more about Black Patriots and to honor their courage, their strength, and their commitment to a democracy that they yearned for but did not live to see. So let us hope that by the 250th anniversary of the Revolution, in 2026, that's coming up in just 2 years, a new crop of monuments, markers, murals, and bus wraps will have sprung up across the public landscape to commemorate all our Black Patriots. Public art can play an important role in telling all the stories of Black history, the triumphs and the tragedies, the joys and the struggles. Representation truly matters. Oops. So, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening. And now's the time for questions and answers, interaction.
Thank you so much. Wow, I learned a lot. We hear a lot about statues in the Civil War, but it's really good to learn that it goes farther than that, way back in the history of our country. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just like to say, I love that idea of the bus wrap. I never would have thought of something like that. I was thinking, statue, but the bus wrap was so clever and mobile.
The idea came from a Black woman who's the mayor pro tem of Greensboro.
Oh.
And the designer was a Black man who works for the Greensboro Transit Authority.
Oh, wow.
And their hearts were really in it.
Yeah, so it's a good example of interconnection and building community, and that it takes a village. So let's see, I think Lonnie, if there's any questions from chat. Beth, you have a question?
So, segueing from what you're saying about the bus, some time ago, there was nuns on the bus who came, they traveled throughout the US, and they came over to Christie Park to talk. Does the bus go beyond Greensboro, or might it, or, to?
No, it's local. Mm-hmm. And it runs regular transit routes, but on special occasions, like the MLK parade, it's there. The Veterans Day parade, it's there. The Folk Fest for 3 days, the bus is parked, and interpreters talk to people. There's a lifelong volunteer at the park who loves history and likes to talk about Black Patriots. The superintendent at the military park is Black now. So he's out there, and just, his presence is a message as well as what he has to say. So there may be buses elsewhere, there should be, but this one is Greensboro.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned that, I think his name was Ishmael Titus, after his service. For one thing, I want to comment on his longevity. I mean, that's, remarkable. Remarkable in any case, whatever, but it's wonderful. I applaud it. But you mentioned that he didn't receive the, I don't know the name for
The pension.
The pension that actually was legally written into some kind of rules. Right? At the time, was there any talk about freeing the slaves during that period? I mean, was there an abolition movement during that period? Was there talk about, well, if you join? I mean, it was interesting to me that he joined for his master, so to speak. And so that probably happened quite a bit, right? Yeah, send a slave, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting in itself to be explored, I think, historically. But was there an abolition movement going on at the time?
Well, in the free Black community, there was a lot of awareness of the contradictions between what Americans were espousing publicly and the existing social system. And so some of the African Americans who fought in the Revolution thought that this was a chance to advance both their individual and their collective standing in the community. And in some cases it did that, and in other cases it did not.
The community did that? Or
white racism continued.
Yeah, obviously, but
right.
there was dialogue, there was something going on there.
Yes.
Which would be interesting to know more.
There was. In England, Samuel Pepys talked about the Americans who are carrying on about freedom and independence, and here they are, slaveholders. Isn't that interesting? So people certainly noticed the contradiction.
In England, they stopped importing slaves before America did, I think. I think there was a freedom movement for slaves, and well, Britain started the whole thing anyway, but I think they had a earlier.
Wilberforce led that in the British Parliament, but I think that was early 1830s.
Okay, it was not that much earlier, but it was somewhat earlier.
Right, right.
Okay, it just, what, this sitting here, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It was magnificent as far as I'm concerned. It just opens up all these cracks that we still don't know about, you know what I mean?
I learned so much. I did not grow up learning anything except the standard story about the American Revolution. And I think most of us didn't. As I say, it's been whitewashed. One of the reasons I think is that historians were embarrassed by the fact that more Black people supported the British side than supported the Americans. And for good reasons. If I had been alive at that time, I might have too, probably would.
Maybe this Wilberforce movement helped that support too.
So people made choices based on what's going to serve me best, as well they should, And if they lived in a community where, their neighbors, Black and white, were signing up for one side or the other, that's what they tended to do. But to go back to your question about the pension applications, starting in 1818, the U.S. military was not getting the number of volunteers that it needed. So they decided, we will sweeten the pot, we will provide pensions for the people who served, because the American veterans of the Revolution were getting old and poor, and so they were required to go to their nearest court and make a public statement and supply documentation. And the older the people were who were making the application, the less likely that anyone was still around to supply the documentation. Ishmael first applied at the age of 89, and he was not living where he had served. He had migrated up to Massachusetts. And so there was no one to support his application. And of course, racism played a part in all this. A good number of Black people who applied for pensions did not get them. Some did, but they had to have documentation and, and people willing to stand up and support their application. And sometimes there were such people and sometimes there were not. So Ishmael did not get his pension, and his family is still researching his history. They think they found his burial place, and he has a huge tribe of descendants, and his most active descendant, the man you saw on screen, Solomon Titus Taylor, served many years in the Marines, so he identifies as a military man with his ancestor and his ancestor's proud service. So Solomon drove down for our community forum all the way from Rochester to speak, and he and Serena and I walked around the military park and looked at all the statues, and it was pretty heartwarming. Yes, Sue?
I was wondering if there were organizations in Greensboro that you partnered with, or how you found working with people in Greensboro.
Well, I made connections.
Hey, Joanna, can you repeat the question? We couldn't quite hear it on Zoom.
Okay, someone asked if there were organizations in Greensboro that I have partnered with. Yes, the Greensboro History Museum was the first. They interviewed me after my first op-ed. I got acquainted with the editor of the local paper, who was moderately supportive. When I first called him and said, "What's the link for an op-ed?" he said, 750 words, what do you want to write about? And when I told him, he said, "Well, no, that doesn't apply to us." And I said, "Yes, it does." And when I explained it, he was okay about it. So he's published about 5 of my op-eds. The public library has been very involved and supportive. When I visit the UU Church of Greensboro and take copies of my op-eds, they're always interested. And there is a woman there who's also a descendant of one of the white men who fought in that battle. So I would say that the military park is the strongest supporter now, because the superintendent is African American. He's Aaron LaRocca. He's a career service in the National Park Service, and he was initially based at Arlington House, the Lee Plantation, which is in the process of being renamed. And he helped to update the narrative that visitors hear there. And there's no more talk of good slaveholders. He says there's no such thing. And he's quite right. So what's happening now at the military park, they have Black Patriots tours every Saturday, 3 of them, led by this lifelong volunteer. The website has been hugely updated to list all the Black Patriots that they found so far, 46 of them. The interpretive ranger there is a genius at research. The pension applications are a great source of information, and they are now being digitized and more available to researchers. So slowly, the word is going out that this is a real subject. A book was just published at the end of 2023 by Dr. Shirley Green, who is spent many years in law enforcement in Toledo, and then went and got her PhD in history and wrote a book about her revolutionary ancestors. The book title is Revolutionary Blacks. She's going to be one of the speakers at the anniversary lecture series. Every year they have 3 historians. And in the past, it's been, older white male scholars. And this year, there's a Black woman scholar, a young white man scholar, and one old white male scholar. So things are changing, and I wish they were changing faster, but in some ways, I'm surprised at how well it has gone, and delighted that leaders of the Black community are owning this idea and saying, not that side, we want it here. And said, yes, exactly. Other questions?
Joanna, this is Lonnie. Did you get any hate mail or hate emails from the pushback when they initially starting this endeavor? And thank you so much. This is just wonderful to hear. But did you get pushback?
You know, I expected that I would. I made myself a little less visible on social media, but people who wanted to still found me. I got some not progressive responses, but not hate mail either. One response seemed to be thoughtful. A man was reflecting on his own ancestry, and he said, my ancestor was a poor man, but he owned one slave, and he was thoughtful enough that he and I went back and forth on an exchange. And then I finally realized where he was coming from, and it was way to the right of my political position, so we stopped communicating. But yeah, I've been surprised that I didn't get as much overt opposition. I think I feel like in some ways what I got was just ho-hum. It just sort of this being ignored, It's like you almost need to beat a drum or something to call attention that this is an important issue for our whole country, but particularly in Greensboro because of its history.
Thank you.
So I have some handouts back there. I will say one other thing, this reckoning, it's taking place everywhere, and in this area, a bust to Huey Newton went up, and there is a woman who created, it's murals, and it's a house of information. It's like a small museum about the women of the Black Panther Party. And, names have gotten changed of schools. And there's a street name downtown, the Kalabagai Street, to honor a woman of Asian descent who was a longtime teacher here. So all over the place, people are looking around and saying, does this represent who we really are, the full story of our history? In many cases, it does not. And so people, take action to change that. And I think that's great. So are you folks aware of any such changes in this area?
Well, Joanna, can I follow up on that? The museum you're talking about down in Oakland initially was a pop-up museum.
Mm-hmm.
The woman lives in that structure.
Yes.
But then they were working toward making it a full-time museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we talked about that at the Social Justice Council
Mm-hmm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I intend to get in touch with her. I've been to the museum, and her sister is a fellow traveler with our congregation. So I have some connections there. I'm thinking about that woman and I presenting on March the 10th at my congregation, talking about, that's the other interesting thread in all this. Much of the activism about changing our public viewing, come from women. So I'm not surprised that a woman in Oakland would create this museum to honor the women of the Black Panther Party. And in the few cases where national military parks do already honor Black patriots, one of them is at Valley Forge. And it was in 1993, a Black sorority, the last monuments I showed were a monument to the patriots of African descent there. And it's beautiful, and it has been a site for a community collaboration. Every year they ask school children to write about the American Revolution and what it means to them and their ancestors. And kids can write a rap, a song, an essay, and they get $150 gift certificates, and they get to perform in public. So this community is still, there were 770 Black people who were at Valley Forge, and now they are commemorated appropriately. So a few other places, even the DAR in some chapters, surprisingly, has been active, and sometimes it's even collaborated with the NAACP. You can still count on about the fingers of one hand the commemoration of Black patriots in public places.
Joanna, what is your UU background?
I first connected with the UUs in Nashville, Tennessee during the Civil Rights Movement when I was a college student. And I was affiliated with 4th U in New York City, and then affiliated with BFUU here. And there were some gaps in there too, I'll have to acknowledge. Yes.
Yes, I wondered, you mentioned that you attended the UU in Greensboro, North Carolina,
Mhm.
and I wondered what that was like. I mean, were they totally back behind you? Were they, showing the flag, so to speak, or was that also a place where there was some hesitancy and kind of stuff, just a guilt or whatever? What was the atmosphere there, and also was it all white, or was it?
No, it's not all white.
Okay, and what was the?
Right. Like many UU congregations, it tends to be older, and it does tend towards white, but there are people of all backgrounds there.
Okay, that was.
And the minister is a young woman, well, anybody's young compared to me. It's a young woman from Maryland whose ancestor was also in the Revolution. And I knew her briefly in New York, and so far she said, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, but I think she prefers to wait to have a local person to speak about this.
Oh, so she didn't invite you to speak?
Not yet.
That's interesting. I mean, that's unfortunate.
I understand that. I mean, they like to have local speakers, and that makes sense to me.
It makes sense, that's true, but it doesn't make fuller sense.
I hope that Serena and I will speak there together. We spoke at Serena's church, the Faith Community Church of Greensboro. We spoke there on July the 9th, just after the bus had made its debut. And that was pretty heartwarming.
It's interesting the way things move, right?
Yes.
I appreciate your sense of, even in, my personal life, it's like, I can do much more in terms of, growing your understanding more, but like, whoa, it takes months and months and months, and you never, there's all that uncertainty in that.
Right.
Patience or whatever you want to call it. Right. But it's moving. We started something really big. But.
Serena introduced me to some of the people that I work with now, the people at the library. The librarian is a friend of hers. So yeah, she's sharing her connections with me.
The gathering of the spirit is something to look for.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you've got your Gmail, I believe,
Uh-huh.
available, and also it's monument-matter.com, and then there's all this information in the background if people really like to pick that up. And
We will take some and put it on the Social Justice Council table
Excellent.
so that people know more about it.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah.
because I did notice that there are several people that were on Zoom, and many of them are members of the Social Justice Council, so
Great.
that will be great. You'll use your information, your printed information to help with the work.
Thank you, Sue, for inspiring me to connect, to do this. Your sermon on storms was wonderful. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.